The waters of False Bay turned red in seconds. A massive great white shark, nearly 5 meters long and weighing over a ton, had struck from below with devastating precision. The orca calf never had a chance. Rows of serrated teeth clamped onto its small body with bone-crushing force. Blood spread across the surface like spilled ink, staining the cold South African waters. The calf's desperate calls echoed through the ocean, high-pitched distress signals that traveled for miles. But no amount of struggle could break the shark's grip. This was False Bay, and the great white was feeding. The matriarch arrived too late. Her 6-ton body cut through the water at maximum speed, but by the time she reached the attack site, her calf was already being dragged toward the depths. She rammed the shark with her rostrum, a blow that could kill a seal instantly. The great white absorbed the impact and held firm. She tried positioning herself between predator and prey, but the shark was descending fast, pulling its prize into deeper water where orcas lose their advantage. The pod surfaced around the chaos. 4 juveniles, aged 3 to 5 years old, formed a tight circle around their matriarch. These were her daughters, nieces, and younger sisters, bound by blood and years of coordinated hunting. They had driven great whites from seal colonies dozens of times before. They had hunted 7-gill sharks in these exact waters, using techniques passed down through generations. But this attack was different. The shark had struck first, taken what it wanted, and now it was escaping into the murky depths below. The juveniles clicked frantically, their sonar creating a chaotic symphony of confusion and alarm. They could hear the calf's weakening heartbeat. They could sense its fading bioelectric signature growing dimmer with each passing second. Marine mammals understand death in ways researchers can only document from the surface. They recognize when one of their own has crossed a threshold from which there is no return. At 40 feet depth, the great white released its grip and vanished into the darkness of False Bay. The shark had not killed for territory or dominance. It had killed following instincts refined over 400 million years of evolution. The calf's body began drifting downward, leaving a blood trail that would attract scavengers for hours. The matriarch dove immediately, her powerful flukes driving her down through the red-stained water. She reached her calf at 60 feet and used her rostrum to push the small body toward the surface. For the next 4 hours, she carried her dead offspring through False Bay's waters. Marine biologists call this behavior epimelectic care, but to any observer, it looked exactly like mourning. She vocalized continuously, producing sounds researchers had never recorded from this population before, low-frequency calls that seemed to have no purpose except expression. The 4 juveniles maintained formation around her, creating a protective barrier against any threat. They did not hunt. They did not feed. They simply stayed, moving through the bay in a slow, deliberate pattern. Other orcas from distant pods detected the unusual vocalizations and kept their distance. Something fundamental had changed in False Bay's power structure, though no one could yet understand what. As sunset painted the water orange and gold, the matriarch finally released her calf's body. It sank slowly, disappearing into the same depths where the great white had vanished. She remained at the surface, her massive head breaking the waterline, one eye visible above the waves. That eye was fixed on the deeper water below, tracking movements invisible to human observation. What happened next would take 5 years to unfold, but in that moment, as the pod gathered in the fading light of False Bay, something primal had been triggered. The matriarch and her family did not leave those waters. They would not leave for a very long time. Marine researchers would later document what followed as the most systematic hunting behavior ever observed in wild orcas. But they had no idea they were about to witness a calculated execution that would change everything scientists thought they knew about killer whale intelligence and memory. This wasn't just grief. This was the beginning of a 5-year hunt. False Bay stretches along the southeastern coast of South Africa, covering over 1,000 square kilometers of cold, productive ocean. Atlantic currents collide with warmer Indian Ocean waters here, creating one of the richest marine ecosystems on Earth. Seal colonies thrive on rocky outcrops. Schools of fish darken the water during migration. 2 apex predators have ruled these depths for thousands of years: orcas and great white sharks. They coexisted through mutual avoidance. Orcas dominated through intelligence and coordination. Sharks survived through ambush tactics and solitary hunting. The balance worked because both species respected invisible boundaries. That balance was about to shatter. The matriarch was 25 feet of pure orca evolution. At approximately 6 tons, she represented the pinnacle of her species. Her saddle patch carried unique scarring that made her instantly recognizable to researchers. Born in these waters 15 years earlier, she had learned hunting from her mother and eventually claimed dominance over prime Western Shore territory. She could wave-wash seals off rocks with surgical precision. 9 years of ruling False Bay had made her the undisputed queen of these hunting grounds. No predator challenged her authority. Her pod consisted of 4 related females, forming a tight matrilineal unit. Her 22-foot sister served as second-in-command during hunts. 2 juveniles aged 4 and 5 were her daughters, already showing elite coordination skills. The youngest was her 3-year-old niece, eager to prove herself. Together, they operated without serious challenge for nearly a decade. They communicated through complex clicks and whistles unique to their family. They shared food, protected each other, and passed knowledge through generations in ways resembling culture more than instinct. The calf that died had been her 4th offspring. Born 8 months earlier during austral winter, the young male had been thriving under constant maternal care. He was learning to breach and practicing tail slaps that would later stun prey. He was beginning to understand sophisticated sonar techniques orcas use to navigate and hunt. His future was mapped through millions of years of evolutionary success. He would have stayed with the pod for life, eventually helping hunt and protect future generations. That future ended in seconds. The great white that killed him was equally impressive biologically. Males reach 5 meters and weigh over 1,000 kilograms. This particular shark had been documented in False Bay for 6 years, identified through distinctive scarring along his left flank and a notched dorsal fin. Researchers had captured him hunting seals at Seal Island using camera traps and drones. He was a perfect ambush predator, attacking from below with explosive speed. His success rate was nearly 40%, exceptionally high for great white seal hunting. Great whites don't hunt orcas intentionally. The species typically avoid direct confrontation. Orcas are larger, more intelligent, and hunt in coordinated groups. Sharks are solitary specialists relying on surprise and overwhelming force. When orcas appear, great whites leave, sometimes abandoning prime territories for months. Marine biologists documented this pattern repeatedly. Orca arrival equals shark departure. The relationship was clear. Orcas were dominant. But this shark made a catastrophic mistake. Perhaps he confused the small calf for a seal. Perhaps hunger overrode caution. Perhaps millions of years of instinct misfired in one fatal moment. Whatever the reason, he attacked the offspring of False Bay's apex predator. Unlike previous encounters where sharks retreated from orcas, this time retreat wouldn't be enough. The matriarch spent the first night in the exact location where her calf died. Her pod formed a protective circle as darkness fell. They didn't hunt or travel to usual resting areas. Marine researchers monitoring hydrophones detected unusual behavior immediately. As sunrise broke on day 2, the matriarch began moving. Not toward open ocean where her pod normally hunted. Not toward seal colonies where easy prey waited. She moved along bottom contours where great whites patrol, her sonar sweeping depths with methodical precision. Her pod followed in formation. They were no longer hunting for food. Every great white in False Bay was about to learn a lesson remembered for generations. Subscribe to see how this mother executed her plan over 5 years. The matriarch had found a new purpose, and False Bay would never be the same. The attack happened at 11:47 a.m. on a clear autumn morning. The matriarch had been teaching her calf advanced diving techniques near the kelp forests along False Bay's western edge. Water temperature was 14 degrees Celsius, visibility excellent at nearly 20 meters. The calf practiced controlled descents, learning to regulate buoyancy while tracking small fish movements. His mother stayed close, her sonar monitoring his progress while simultaneously scanning for threats. She detected harbor seals feeding south, yellow-tailed tuna passing overhead, rock lobsters clicking along the seafloor. Everything appeared normal. The great white approached from directly below at 40 meters depth. He had been tracking the orca movements for nearly an hour, following at distances where their sonar couldn't distinguish him from background noise. Great whites are masters of stealth when hunting, using thermal layers and ambient sounds as camouflage. This male had observed orcas before and learned their patterns. He knew the calf separated during practice dives. He knew the precise moment vulnerability. He waited with patience, perfected over millions of years. When he struck, the attack was textbook great white predation, vertical ascent at maximum speed, accelerating from 40 meters to surface in under 8 seconds. His body became a living missile powered by a crescent tail generating over 4,000 pounds of thrust. The calf detected movement at the last possible second, turning instinctively toward his mother. Too late. The shark's jaws opened to nearly 180 degrees, revealing 5 rows of serrated teeth. Impact velocity exceeded 25 miles per hour. The bite force reached 4,000 pounds per square inch. When those jaws clamped onto the calf's midsection, ribs cracked audibly. The young orca's distress calls pierced the water instantly, high-frequency screams carrying for 10 miles underwater. Every orca in False Bay heard those sounds. The matriarch was 30 meters away when her calf screamed. She covered that distance in 4 seconds, her massive body creating a pressure wave. She rammed the shark with her rostrum, delivering over 2 tons of force directly to his gill slits. Great whites are built to absorb punishment. Their cartilaginous skeletons flex under impacts that would shatter bone. The shark held firm, beginning the characteristic head-shaking motion that tears flesh from struggling prey. Blood clouded the water, making visibility drop to less than 5 meters. The matriarch attacked again, striking the shark's eye with her teeth. She drew blood but caused no serious damage. Her calf's struggles were weakening with each passing second. The sound of his distress calls was fading. The rest of the pod arrived within moments. 4 orcas surrounded the shark, creating coordinated attack patterns they had used successfully against 7 gill sharks. But great whites are faster, stronger, far more dangerous. The male released the calf and dove, using superior speed to escape downward. The orcas couldn't follow fast enough. By the time they reached 50 meters depth, the great white had disappeared into blue void below, leaving only a blood trail spreading through the current. The matriarch returned to her calf immediately. The young male was still alive, but fading rapidly. Massive lacerations across his midsection leaked blood in pulsing streams. His breathing was labored, each exhalation producing pink foam. She positioned herself beneath him, using her body to push him toward the surface. The pod formed a protective barrier. For 37 minutes, the calf struggled. His mother never left his side, vocalizing continuously in sounds researchers would later struggle to classify. At 12:24 p.m., the calf's heart stopped. His body went limp against his mother's rostrum. The bioelectric signature that all living creatures produce simply ceased. The matriarch continued pushing him toward the surface for another 20 minutes. She released him slowly, watching as her offspring's body began sinking. The pod vocalized together, creating a chorus that echoed across False Bay. Then silence, complete, absolute silence. For the next 6 hours, the matriarch carried her dead calf through False Bay's waters. As sunset painted the water orange and gold, she finally released her calf's body. It sank into the same depths where the great white had vanished. She remained at the surface, motionless except for breathing, staring into darkness. Her pod gathered close, and together they began producing low-frequency pulses that seemed to serve no purpose except expression. What the matriarch did next would take 5 years and change everything scientists thought they knew about orca memory. Day 1, after the attack, the matriarch did not leave False Bay's western shore. Her pod remained in a tight formation, circling the area where the calf had died. They did not hunt seals at their usual grounds. They did not travel to deeper waters where prey was abundant. They stayed, moving in slow, deliberate patterns that marine researchers monitoring the bay found unusual. Orcas are nomadic hunters, rarely remaining stationary for extended periods. But this pod wasn't following normal behavior. They were doing something else entirely, something that would take scientists months to understand. By day 3, the matriarch began exhibiting hunting behavior that had never been documented in False Bay's orca population. She started targeting smaller shark species with systematic precision. 7-gill sharks, bronze whalers, even small blue sharks became focus of coordinated attacks. But she wasn't killing them for food. The pod would strike, disable the shark, then simply leave the carcass floating. Researchers observing from boats noticed the pattern immediately. These weren't feeding events. These were practice runs. The matriarch was teaching her pod something new. The technique she developed was brutal and efficient. Orcas would approach sharks from below, using the same ambush angle great whites employ against seals. They would ram the shark's midsection with enough force to stun, but not kill. Then came the critical part, flipping the shark upside down. When sharks are inverted, they enter a state called tonic immobility, essentially paralysis. The orca would hold the shark in this position until it drowned, unable to push water through its gills. Marine biologists call this technique tonic immobility predation. The matriarch was perfecting it. Week 2 brought the first major kill. A 3-meter bronze whaler shark was hunting near Seal Island when the pod struck. The attack was coordinated with military precision. 2 juveniles drove the shark towards shallow water while the matriarch positioned herself in the escape route. Her sister flanked from the right. When the shark tried to dive, all 4 orcas attacked simultaneously. They flipped the bronze whaler in less than 10 seconds. The shark's thrashing stopped within 3 minutes. It was textbook execution of a technique they had been practicing for days. By month 2, the body count was mounting. The matriarch's pod had killed 11 sharks of various species. Each attack refined their technique further. They learned optimal approach angles. They learned which strikes caused maximum disorientation. They learned how long to hold sharks inverted before the kill was certain. False Bay's shark population began exhibiting unusual behavior. Normally, confident predators started avoiding areas where orcas were present. Even large sharks showed retreat patterns when the matriarch's pod appeared. Marine researchers began documenting something remarkable. The pod was developing what biologists call cultural transmission of hunting techniques. The matriarch would demonstrate a specific maneuver, then her juveniles would replicate it during the next hunt. Mistakes were corrected through repeated practice. Successful techniques were reinforced through consistent application. This wasn't instinct. This was learned behavior being passed down and refined in real time. It was evidence of genuine teaching, something previously documented in only a handful of animal species. 6 months after losing her calf, the matriarch made her first kill of a great white shark. The specimen was young, approximately 3 meters long, hunting seals near rocky outcrops. The attack happened at dawn. The pod surrounded the shark in open water, cutting off all escape routes. The matriarch struck from below, ramming the great white's gill slits with devastating force. Before the shark could recover, she flipped it inverted. The great white entered tonic immobility immediately. Within 4 minutes, it was dead. The pod didn't feed on the carcass, they simply left it floating. 1 year passed, then 2, then 3. The matriarch's hunting pattern never changed. She targeted sharks with systematic consistency, killing an average of 2 per month. Her pod became the most efficient shark hunters ever documented. But she never attacked the large males, the 4 to 5 meter great whites that matched the size of her calf's killer. Researchers theorized she was waiting, building skills, preparing for something specific. They had no idea how right they were. By year 4, False Bay's great white population had declined measurably. Tourist operators reported fewer shark sightings. Cage diving companies struggled to find specimens for clients. The ecosystem was changing, and the matriarch was the cause. She had transformed her pod into specialized shark killers, and they were getting better with every hunt. Subscribe for more incredible wildlife stories. The matriarch was ready, and somewhere in False Bay's depths, a 5-meter great white with distinctive scarring was about to face consequences 5 years in the making. Year 5 began with an unexpected complication. A rival orca pod appeared in False Bay's eastern waters in early autumn. The group consisted of 6 individuals, led by a massive 28-foot matriarch with a completely black saddle patch. Marine researchers identified them as transient orcas, nomadic hunters who specialized in marine mammal prey rather than fish. Transients are larger, more aggressive, and far more territorial than resident orca populations. Their arrival meant direct competition for False Bay's resources, and they weren't interested in sharing. The rival matriarch made her intentions clear within 48 hours. She began marking territory along the eastern shore, vocalizing in patterns that signaled dominance and challenge. Her pod hunted seals at locations the resident matriarch had controlled for over a decade. They killed a young Cape Fur seal near Seal Island, feeding in full view of the resident pod. It was a deliberate provocation, a statement that False Bay now had new management. The resident matriarch faced an impossible choice: confront the invaders or continue her hunt for the Great White. Confrontation between orca pods is rare but brutal when it occurs. Adult orcas can inflict devastating injuries on each other using the same techniques they employ against prey. Ramming, biting, coordinated attacks from multiple angles. Pod conflicts have been documented, resulting in permanent injuries and even deaths. The resident matriarch was outnumbered 6-5. Her pod consisted mainly of juveniles still learning advanced hunting techniques. The transients were all fully mature, battle-tested adults. A direct fight would be suicide, but abandoning False Bay meant abandoning her hunt. For 4 years, she had systematically killed sharks, refining techniques, building expertise, waiting for the right moment to find the specific great white that killed her calf. Leaving now would erase all that preparation. The rival pod didn't hunt sharks. They hunted seals, dolphins, even young whales. If the resident matriarch left, the great white would remain unchallenged, free to hunt in waters where he had taken everything from her. The territorial tension escalated daily. Both pods began vocal displays, producing loud calls that echoed across the entire bay. Researchers monitoring hydrophones detected aggression patterns in the vocalizations. The transient matriarch was pushing boundaries, testing how far she could encroach before triggering a response. She moved her pod westward each day, claiming more territory, getting closer to the resident pod's core hunting grounds. Within a week, only 2 kilometers separated the two groups. On day 8 of the standoff, the situation became critical. A massive storm system developed off the South African coast, bringing 6-meter swells and gale-force winds to False Bay. Storms of this magnitude force orcas into deeper offshore waters where wave action is less severe. Both pods would need to leave the bay temporarily, and when they returned, territorial boundaries would reset. Whoever claimed prime hunting grounds first would hold the advantage. The resident matriarch couldn't afford to lose position. The storm arrived on day 9 with devastating force. Winds exceeded 60 kilometers per hour. Surface waters churned into white foam. Visibility dropped to 0. Both orca pods moved toward the bay's entrance, preparing to ride out the storm in deeper water. But as the resident matriarch led her pod through rough seas, her sonar detected something. A large object moving along the seafloor, hugging the bottom where storm surge was minimal. The acoustic signature matched a great white shark, approximately 5 meters in length. She had waited 5 years for this moment. 5 years of killing sharks, learning techniques, building expertise. The storm raged above, the rival pod waited behind, and her juveniles needed her to lead them to safety. Every logical instinct said, leave, survive, return later. But somewhere in the violent waters ahead, the shark that killed her calf was vulnerable. Driven to shallow areas by storm pressure, separated from his usual deep water sanctuary. If she left now, she might never get this chance again. The matriarch made her decision. She turned away from the bay's entrance, away from safety, and dove toward the storm-churned shallows where the great white was sheltering. Her pod followed without hesitation. The rival orcas watched from a distance, confused by their suicidal behavior. Marine researchers monitoring from shore lost all acoustic contact as the storm peaked. What happened next would occur in complete darkness, in violent seas, with no witnesses except the ocean itself. The hunt had finally begun. The storm reduced visibility to less than 3 meters. Wave action churned sediment from the seafloor, creating brown soup that rendered eyesight useless. The matriarch relied entirely on echolocation, sending clicks that painted acoustic pictures of everything within 100 meters. Her sonar detected rocky outcrops, kelp forests bending in current, schools of fish driven deep by surface turbulence. And there, hugging an underwater ridge at 25 meters, the unmistakable shape of a large great white shark. 5 meters long, distinctive notch in dorsal fin, scarring along left flank. After 5 years, she had found him. The great white had taken shelter in a narrow canyon between two rock formations. Storm surge pushed water through this channel with tremendous force, creating currents that made coordinated attacks nearly impossible. The shark positioned himself head-facing into current, using minimal energy to hold position. His lateral line detected the orcas approaching, but he didn't flee. Great whites aren't built for extended pursuits. In these conditions, running would exhaust him faster than staying put. He had survived 50 years by making calculated decisions. The matriarch signaled her pod into formation. Her sister took left flank, positioning to block escape toward deeper water. 2 older juveniles moved right, covering shallow route. The youngest positioned herself above canyon to prevent vertical escape. The matriarch approached from directly ahead, using current to her advantage. It was the same coordinated pattern they had used successfully against 23 sharks over 5 years. But those sharks had been smaller, less experienced, caught in open water. The matriarch struck first, accelerating through current to ram the shark's midsection. Impact force exceeded 3 tons, but the great white was braced against rock. He absorbed the blow and twisted violently, his tail whipping around with bone-breaking power. The strike caught the matriarch's left pectoral fin, tearing a 30-centimeter gash through thick tissue. Blood mixed with storm-churned sediment. She retreated immediately, pain signals firing through neural pathways. First blood went to the shark. Her sister attacked from left, while the shark was focused on the matriarch. She tried the inversion technique, coming up underneath to flip the great white onto his back. But current was too strong, and shark too large. He rolled with her momentum instead of against it, using superior agility. His jaws opened and clamped onto her dorsal fin, serrated teeth cutting through blubber and muscle. The orca screamed. She pulled free, leaving torn tissue in the shark's mouth. The 2 older juveniles attacked simultaneously from right. They had practiced this maneuver hundreds of times, striking in perfect synchronization. But practice had been against smaller sharks in calm water. Storm current pushed them off angle. Their timing was off by less than a second. The great white targeted the trailing juvenile, ramming her with his snout before she could adjust position. The impact stunned her, sending her tumbling through current. The coordinated attack had failed completely. The youngest orca dove from above, attempting to pin the shark against seafloor. She had the right idea, but insufficient mass. At 8 years old, she weighed perhaps 3 tons, compared to the shark's 1.2 tons. Normally enough for dominance, but current negated her weight advantage. The great white pushed upward with explosive force, his tail driving him toward surface. The young orca couldn't hold him. He broke free, ascending into churning storm surge above. The matriarch pursued immediately, but the shark had found his element. Great whites are built for vertical attacks, bodies optimized for rapid depth changes. He used the storm's turbulence as cover, disappearing into chaos of wind-driven waves and sediment clouds. The pod searched for 40 minutes, sonar sweeping every corner. He was gone, vanished into False Bay's vastness. The matriarch had been so close. 5 years of preparation, and she had failed. Her sister's dorsal fin was badly damaged, torn tissue trailing in current. The matriarch's pectoral fin bled steadily. As the storm began to ease, she led her wounded pod toward deeper water. They had lost blood, lost their advantage. The great white had proven why he survived for half a century. The rival pod was still waiting at the bay's entrance. Tomorrow, she would face them with wounded crew and shattered confidence. Share this if you believe she deserves another chance. 3 weeks after the failed attempt, the matriarch's wounds had healed, but her strategy had changed. She no longer searched for the great white actively. Instead, she waited. Orcas are apex predators, with one advantage sharks can never match: patience combined with intelligence. She studied the patterns of False Bay's remaining great whites, noting their routes, their hunting schedules, their predictable behaviors. And she noticed something critical. Every great white in the bay followed the same pattern after successful seal kills. They moved to deeper water to digest, staying in a specific zone between 40 and 60 meters depth where they felt secure. The matriarch positioned her pod along the boundary of this zone, creating a perimeter that covered nearly 2 kilometers of ocean. They waited in shifts, rotating positions every few hours to maintain constant surveillance. The rival pod had claimed the eastern shore, but showed no interest in the deep water zones where sharks rested. This was the matriarch's territory now, earned through 5 years of relentless hunting. She had killed 27 sharks in these waters. She had learned their behaviors better than any orca in recorded history, and she knew her target would eventually make a mistake. On day 23 of the surveillance, the great white appeared. He had successfully killed a young Cape Fur seal near Seal Island at dawn, the ambush captured by tourist cameras from boats above. The shark fed quickly, then descended, following his instinctual pattern toward the deep resting zone. He was alone, satiated, moving slowly to conserve energy for digestion. The matriarch detected him at 200 meters distance. She didn't signal her pod immediately. She tracked him silently, waiting for the perfect depth, the perfect position. At 45 meters, far from any rocky shelter, she gave the signal. The pod converged from 4 directions simultaneously. The great white detected movement too late. He tried accelerating toward deeper water, but the matriarch's sister was already there, blocking his descent. He turned toward shallows, but the 2 older juveniles cut off that route. The youngest orca positioned herself above, preventing any vertical escape. The shark was surrounded in open water with nowhere to run. This time there was no storm, no current, no rock formations to use as defense. Just 5 orcas and 1 shark in the blue void. The matriarch struck from the front, ramming the shark's gills with surgical precision. The impact stunned him, disrupting his breathing rhythm. Before he could recover, her sister attacked from below, flipping him onto his back with a perfectly executed barrel roll. The great white entered tonic immobility instantly, his body going rigid as neural signals misfired. The matriarch positioned herself alongside him, holding him inverted with her body weight. Her sister maintained pressure from below. The juveniles circled, ready to intercept any escape attempt. The shark thrashed violently, fighting against paralysis with every ounce of evolutionary survival instinct. His tail whipped back and forth, creating turbulence that pushed against the orcas holding him. But 5 years of practice had prepared them for this exact scenario. They adjusted positions fluidly, compensating for every movement, never releasing pressure. The matriarch vocalized continuously, low-frequency pulses that seemed to coordinate her pod's movements with perfect timing. They worked as a single organism, 5 brains operating with unified purpose. After 4 minutes, the shark's movements began weakening. Great whites must swim continuously to push water through their gills. Held, inverted, and motionless, he was drowning in open ocean. His thrashing became sporadic, desperate. At 6 minutes, his tail went still. At 8 minutes, his gill movements ceased. The matriarch held position for another 3 minutes, ensuring the kill was complete. Then, she released him. The great white's body began sinking slowly toward the seafloor, 5 meters of apex predator reduced to carrion. The matriarch didn't celebrate. She circled the dead shark once, her sonar reading every detail of his body, the scarring along his left flank, the notched dorsal fin, the massive head that had crushed her calf 5 years earlier. She vocalized once, a sound researchers monitoring hydrophones would later describe as unlike any orca call previously recorded. Then she turned away, her pod falling into formation around her. The shark that killed her calf was dead, but her work in False Bay wasn't finished. The rival pod still controlled the eastern shore. The matriarch led her pod toward that territory, moving with the confidence of predators who had just accomplished the impossible. They had hunted and killed a fully grown great white shark in open water using pure strategy and coordination. Now they would reclaim what was theirs. For 5 years she had waited for this moment, and nothing would stop her now. The confrontation with the rival pod happened at dawn the following day. The matriarch led her family directly into the eastern shore territory the transients had claimed. There was no hesitation, no diplomatic vocalization. She moved with the authority of an orca who had just killed a 5-meter great white shark in open water. The rival matriarch rose to meet her, flanked by 5 adults. The two leaders faced each other across 50 meters of water, their pods positioned for battle. But something had changed in the resident matriarch's presence. 5 years of hunting apex predators had transformed her. The transient matriarch vocalized first, a deep, threatening call that claimed dominance. The resident matriarch responded with a sound that made every orca in the vicinity go silent. It was the same vocalization she had produced after killing the great white, a call that seemed to carry weight beyond mere noise. The transients hesitated. In orca society, confidence is everything. The rival pod had claimed territory through aggression and size advantage, but they had never faced an opponent who radiated this level of absolute certainty. Within 20 minutes, the transient pod began moving east, away from False Bay's prime hunting grounds. The resident matriarch didn't pursue. She had made her point. False Bay belonged to her pod, earned through 5 years of the most sophisticated hunting behavior ever documented in wild orcas. The transients left the bay entirely within 48 hours, returning to their nomadic patterns along the South African coast. Researchers monitoring the interaction noted the unusual outcome. Smaller pods don't typically displace larger ones without physical conflict, but this wasn't a typical pod anymore. This was a family of specialized predators operating at a level marine biology had rarely witnessed. Over the following months, the matriarch's behavior returned to patterns observed before her calf's death. The pod hunted seals at traditional grounds. They traveled to deeper waters during seasonal migrations. They raised new calves born to the younger females. But one behavior remained constant. Every week, the matriarch led her pod to the deep zone where the great white had died. They would circle the area once, vocalizing in patterns that seemed ceremonial rather than communicative. Then, they would return to normal activities. False Bay's great white shark population slowly recovered, but the ecosystem had fundamentally changed. Younger sharks exhibited extreme caution around areas where orcas were present. Several documented great whites abandoned the bay entirely, tracked by researchers to hunting grounds over 200 kilometers away. The matriarch had created a zone of dominance that extended beyond her physical presence. The memory of 27 dead sharks and one calculated execution had rewritten the rules of False Bay's food chain. Orcas were no longer just another predator. They were the undisputed apex. Marine biologists published papers on the pod's hunting techniques. The systematic killing of sharks over 5 years demonstrated cognitive abilities that challenged existing understanding of orca intelligence. The coordinated attack that killed the great white became a case study in marine mammal cooperation and learning. Documentaries featured footage of the pod, narrated by researchers who struggled to find appropriate language. Words like revenge seemed too human, but instinct seemed inadequate for behavior this sophisticated and prolonged. 3 years after the great white's death, the matriarch's oldest daughter gave birth to a female calf in the same waters where the matriarch had lost her offspring 8 years earlier. The family gathered around the newborn, vocalizing in celebration. The matriarch positioned herself close to her daughter, teaching the young mother the same protective techniques she had once used. The cycle continued, knowledge passed down, the pod stronger for everything they had survived. Today, the matriarch still rules False Bay's western shore. She is estimated to be nearly 25 years old, entering her prime years as an orca. Her pod has grown to 7 individuals with the addition of new calves. She still hunts sharks occasionally, maintaining the technique she perfected over 5 years of systematic killing. But she no longer hunts with the intensity that defined those years. The debt has been paid, the balance restored. False Bay remembers what happened when one orca refused to forget. Subscribe for more incredible stories of animal intelligence and tell me in the comments, do you think she got justice? 5 years, 1 mission, a mother who changed everything scientists thought they knew about killer whale memory.